much for attending. This is a great opportunity to think about a very brief but critically important period of U.S. history with Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Scott Stump's going to talk to us about the road where we're at on this memorial, how we got here, and what that period of history means. Just as a note, we'll be streaming this. When we get to a Q&A there toward the end, just identify yourself and who you're affiliated with, and we'll be able to handle that. And then we're cell phones. If I've had to make sure I turn mine off, those things will ring at the most inappropriate times, if you could check that as well. My own personal experience or relationship to Desert Storm as a young captain finishing a military school. Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. And for a young Marine, you thought, boy, I got to get in this fight because it's the only one that's going to happen in my lifetime, right? So if I'm not there, I'm not bringing home the war medals and my career is over. History does tend to give you other opportunities later on, but as a young captain, you thought this is going to be the end all. So one of the three captains, I was one of those three. One of them was with an artillery unit, got sent straight over. The Saudi Arabia went in. One was sent up to an aviation supply office in Philadelphia, and I was sent to headquarters Marine Corps. So got the support from afar for a bit, and then right after the end of the operation, went over to collect data on how things had happened. And it was just an amazing testament to the ability for the U.S. military to organize, to deploy, to put together coalitions, and to really fight a fight as you would want it to. And I think Scott's going to talk to this kind of moment in history, and that it finally put to rest this malaise that existed post-Vietnam, you know, the old Vietnam syndrome. And it was just a remarkable opportunity where you saw America come together in a big victory parade afterwards. It's just an amazing thing. So introduce you, come on up and tell us about the memorial and how we're gotten. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dakota. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here, and I wanted to wish you all a happy Constitution Day. And I had a little bit of logistical snafus involved to the hurricane, but got here a little bit earlier yesterday, and it's great to be here with you. There's no way we can win. The enemy is battle-hardened after an 8-year war. We're just a bunch of volunteers. It's impossible for us to conduct and to win a war in the desert. I don't know if any of you, and I know some of you are a little bit younger, might not remember those comments. And I may be doing something wrong here. Do I need to get the next slide? Do I need to? Okay, it's a little bit of a delay. Sorry about that. Some of you may not be old enough to remember this, so you've got to put things in perspective. This comment right here is one of the more optimistic that was made after Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. If you take a look at that, tens of thousands of casualties were predicted. There was still, and what you have to remember too is that there is still a lingering cloud of uncertainty and doubt as to our country's resolve, along with the proficiency and capabilities of our military at that point. We are less than 20 years removed from Vietnam at this point, as Dakota had mentioned. So there was that lingering cloud of doubt. So what I want to do here this morning real briefly is I want to take you back to the beginning. I'm going to walk you through chronologically, and the good news is it's not World War II, so it's not going to take that long. And then we'll get to where the current effort is at this point. But let's go back to day one. This is a scene in Kuwait City, August 2nd of 1990, when 100,000 Iraqi troops stormed the border of Kuwait and initiated a murderous and torturous 7-month occupation, which at the end of this left thousands of Kuwaitis dead. On August 7th, Operation Desert Shield was initiated. And the mission of Desert Shield was to ensure that Saudi Arabia and the entire Arabian Peninsula was shielded from further invasion. And the thing in history, if you look back, if they would have kept going, they would have had it. But for some reason, they stopped in Kuwait. So on August 7th, Desert Shield initiated. Elements of the 82nd Airborne are the first who deployed and who were boots on the ground. And we kind of jokingly refer to them, and they even talked about this afterwards. They called them the speed bump, because even though they were there, all they would have done is slow down this force. They were just outmanned. They were out, too much equipment that was there on the ground. So August 7th is when Desert Shield kicked into gear. Meanwhile, back here in Washington, D.C., President Bush, along with Secretary Baker and the cabinet, got to work on assembling the largest coalition of countries ever assembled. Now, I want to point out on this list of countries, and by the way, this was 34 total countries from 5 continents. Every kind of religion you can think of, 5 continents are represented here. And I wanted to point out that there are a couple of names there. If you take a look over on the right is one of them. But you see Syria and you see Egypt represented. Yeah, they were on our side. They actually had troops that were right next to ours. Okay, so very remarkable. And you just see how things can evolve and change over time. The other 2 names on there I want to point out that are very interesting, although they're not part of the official coalition, Germany and Japan were involved heavily in that they were financial contributors. And they donated billions with a B to this effort for a successful conclusion and mission. It was very, very important. And last but not least, I'd like to point out 3 countries on this list who it took a tremendous act of courage on all of their parts to be a part of this coalition. You saw what the predictions were, right? Okay, this wasn't predicted to be a stunning moment in American history. It was doom and gloom, tens of thousands of people dying. But you have 3 countries on there that are represented. Hungary, the Czech Republic, which up there it's called Czechoslovakia back at that point. I got that right. I didn't stumble too much. As well as Poland. This was the first act of independence that these countries took after coming out from under the decades of Soviet oppression that they were under. So it took a tremendous amount of courage for them to join this coalition because it was very uncertain at that point. So very interesting menagerie of countries that we have put together here that were part of the coalition. The air war, okay? Many seem to erroneously refer to Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm as the 100-hour war. Have you all heard that? It's a 100-hour war, my gosh. Well, the problem is they forget the fact that we had 42 days of aerial bombardments, okay, that started on, here in the States, it was the evening of January 16th, where I was and where all the troops were. It was the next day. It was the early morning of the 17th of January. And I remember it vividly. I was being a good infantryman. I was in a hole in the desert, freezing half to death, halfway falling asleep. And around 3:30 in the morning, the roar of F-18s and F-16s came flying over my head. They were so low, I felt like I could reach up and touch them. And I want to preface this by saying, and Dakota, I think you could probably appreciate this, being a military person, we were hoping beyond hope that there would be a peaceful resolution for this, okay? It wasn't all blood and guts, oorah, we were really hoping that there could be a peaceful resolution. But at that point, those hopes were shattered. We knew that something big was happening. And I happened to, for some reason, I counted the aircraft that were flying over my head. I counted 93 of them. 93 aircraft. About 5 hours later, as the sun was coming up, and I looked off to the right at the Arabian Gulf or Persian Gulf, whatever you want to call it, and I noticed and I counted again, like little bees coming into the flight line. I counted 88 of them. I might have missed several because I was, as you can imagine, the adrenaline was probably pumping a little more than normal. But that was my gauge of determining, wow, it looks like maybe we were fairly successful, okay? And again, it hit us all out of nowhere. Nobody really expected it to happen. So what was the impact? I want to point out the fact that there were over 100,000 sorties flown by the coalition during those 42 days. I mean, wrap your head around, that's just a phenomenal number of sorties. 100,000, 88,500 tons Somebody that's good with math can probably double that and come up with a number, but that's a lot of bombing on all of the strategic targets in southern Iraq as well as Kuwait. So it was a phenomenal display of the air power and air superiority that I feel fortunate to have been a witness firsthand to. Let's move on to the ground war, okay? And then this is what took 100 hours. And I'm going to give all the credit to the efficiency and effectiveness of the air campaign. The troops on the ground also, their training, it worked. Okay, all of the things we had to keep doing over and over again that we hated, it actually worked in this case. In fact, it was so effective that many of the troops were outrunning the supply lines. In other words, they got so far ahead and they took so much ground so rapidly that the supplies were behind. So they're running out of gasoline, they're running out of food, and they're running out of water. And water especially, you don't want to run out of that in a desert. But it was just a phenomenal display of competence and professionalism in the way they conducted this campaign. I'd also like to point out, too, and you saw early at the very beginning of the presentation, the little gold hook. This is also where the left hook military maneuver came into play. Is anybody familiar with the left hook? Haven't heard of the left hook? Okay. The left hook, and it's, by the way, we have it on all of our materials as part of our logo. It's an iconic symbol for the military maneuver that was executed in Operation Desert Storm. Now, the Iraqis erroneously had the assumption that we were going to make an amphibious assault in Kuwait, right in Kuwait. So all the defenses, the mines, they were all along the coast. And what this military maneuver allowed to happen was they came from the west, plunged deep into Iraq, and then enveloped and looped around in the right hook around Kuwait, effectively cutting off the forces there. A flanking maneuver is basically what, if you want to get fancy. They weren't looking for it. And I will tell you, folks, I have no doubt that this maneuver saved tens of thousands of lives. It absolutely did, because taking a front-on amphibious assault, it could have had some really drastic consequences. But it was a brilliant maneuver. So anytime you see that little swirl, that's a left hook. That's representative of the left hook military maneuver that took place during Operation Desert Storm. I'd also be remiss if I didn't point out that the largest tank battle took place since World War II in Operation Desert Storm. Battle of 73 Easting. Huge, tremendously successful tank battle. 73 Easting also has the distinction of being the last major tank battle in the 20th century. Whoops, I'm missing a slide. Well, I'm missing one. That's okay. The mission, and then the next slide was going to be some jubilant Kuwaitis that were celebrating with the U.S. forces because they were just liberated. So I'm sorry, for some reason that one did not get into the mix for whatever reason. But I want to point out the fact that the mission has been convoluted. And I'm not sure if any of you all knew this before. Some of you did, but I just want to remind you that the mission was singular. And it was only one mission, and it always was one mission, and that was to liberate the people of Kuwait. I know it's been conflated since 9/11, and you should have gone in. It was never to invade Iraq. It was never to depose Saddam Hussein. It was always to liberate the citizens of Kuwait. The other thing I want to point out, too, is that there was a mandate by the UN resolution that was what we were limited to do. It was to liberate and expel the Iraqis from Kuwait. I know, again, it's been conflated. It's kind of been mixed up, but I had a kind of an interesting experience a couple of years ago. It was at a small function that I had invited Secretary of State James Baker to. And he was making some comments, and at the very end of his comments, he said, he wrapped up his comments by saying, you know, up until about 10 or 12 years ago, people would continually ask me, Jim, why didn't you all just go on in there and take care of business while you had the chance? And he said, you know, the funny thing but is, nobody asks me that question anymore, because unfortunately now they know the answer. Again, the mission was all about, you know, liberating Kuwait. I believe that history will continue to show that that was the right decision to be made. A lot of people, again, we talked about the UN mandate, and I showed you the pictures of all of these coalition countries. I think some of those folks might have been a little bit upset at us, and it could have escalated into something unforeseen if we overstepped our bounds. We stuck to the mission, and that was what it was all about. Let's see if I can get this. Okay, here's the shot. Here's something that most people forget about. This is, I know it looks like a photoshopped image, but this is actual footage in Kuwait. Once things were not looking good for the Iraqis, the retreating forces sabotaged and consequently lit on fire 737 individual oil wells. And I'll tell you from a firsthand experience, it's a sunny day. All of a sudden, it looks darker than midnight. You swear it's going to pour down rain. You're breathing. It's labored. It feels like somebody's standing on your chest. It was the smoke from the oil wells. It was environmental Armageddon. I remember hearing that, you know, Kuwait would never recoup from this. That, you know, the shoreline was going to be destroyed. And on top of this, they also dumped millions of gallons of oil into the Gulf there. So I mean, this was just unreal. Interesting to point out. You think, okay, well, we probably fixed that pretty quick. The last one of these was actually capped and put out 6 months after the cessation of hostilities. So this was a long-term consequence, and it was horrible. I'm not going to get into any of the health effects. I know some of our veterans have had some issues, you know, through the years. I'm not an MD, but common sense would tell me, boy, it almost would make sense that some of this might be contributing to some of those factors. It was a horrible, horrible part of the experience. Some people, where they were located at when it rained, it actually rained down and it was oil and water. I mean, it was a mess. So people really tend to forget about this ecological aspect, really ecological terrorism at its root. Okay, that's okay. A little bit of a delay. Okay, then the next slide, we may be a little bit out of sequence. Okay, here's my slide, and we'll let you look at it real quick, and then I'll move on for the sake of brevity. But here are the scenes of the liberation. Okay, and the two guys in the middle, I meant to get after my guy who put together the slideshow. He didn't even put Americans in there. He's got UK troops in there, you know, celebrating with the Kuwaitis. That's just not right. But they had a right to do that too. They were at the thick of it. But this is a scene, and again, you know, we forever changed the history of Kuwait and really that entire region. I mean, it was just a phenomenal feeling to know that we really did the right thing. And then this is a very interesting slide. This is my last one. Then I won't have to mess around with the slides anymore. Right here in D.C., June 8th, 1991, the National Victory Day Parade. I've heard rumors that there's talks about another parade trying to replicate this. We won't get into that. But this was on Constitution Avenue. And there's some verbiage that you see underneath General Schwarzkopf, and that's right before the president returned his salute. But this is a scene that took place across cities and small towns across this country. And I just want to tell you that as somebody that was involved in this, we didn't feel comfortable with this attention. We didn't want this. And in fact, we caused such a fuss within our group that our CO assembled us together in formation, and he gave us a dressing down. He said, "This parade is not for you, it's for the people. You're going to do it." We really fought it. We didn't want to do it. We felt very uncomfortable with it. So we do the parade, little backwater town, and we're going down the main street, 5 deep on each side of the road. It was unbelievable, of the street. And we get in front of a reviewing stand. And I can't remember a word that commanding officer said until the very end. And he said, "I dedicate this to the Vietnam veterans that never had it." And right then and there, we knew that this is something that had a lasting significance above and beyond what we had just accomplished in the Middle East. So moving on, I want to just cover real briefly the motivation behind the memorial. As Dakota had mentioned, this was a brief but significant event in history. And that's one thing I just want to get across here as I close out my comments, is that this, don't judge the impact on something by its duration, okay? Please don't make that mistake. I started this 8 years ago when I came to the startling realization that most Americans fell into one of 2 categories. Those that remember Desert Storm as that video game war that was over with before it started, nobody died. Or it was Act 1 to what happened after 9/11, and it was tied in there, and of course they're both guilty of shared geography. But I really felt that it was too important of an event, and the people that were involved were too important to just be relegated to a footnote in history. So took this upon us, and I've had other people say, "Well, yeah, Scott, but yeah, Desert Storm, it was over with so quick." Like, that's a bad thing? I mean, it's like a boxer saying, "Well, gee whiz, I really regret knocking that guy out in 30 seconds. I should have gone all 15 rounds just to see what might happen. Might have gotten interesting." I mean, it's just crazy thinking. And obviously, no war is the best war. I think we can all agree with that. But if one has no other choice, I think that Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm could offer a template of how to conduct one in the right fashion. Have a clearly defined objective, get in, get it done, and get out. And there's many reasons, again, for the memorial. I just want to highlight on 3 real briefly. Again, we liberated a country, and we changed the course of that country. And the way we liberated it was phenomenal, too. We talked about the 34-country coalition. It was unbelievable. And it's our hope that this story through the memorial is going to be able to provide inspiration for future generations that, hey, if you can get 34 countries together from 5 continents and do the right thing, my gosh. I mean, think about how remarkable that is, even in today's environment. You could get 34 senators into a room right now and couldn't get them to agree on anything, let alone actually accomplish something. It's phenomenal, the level of cooperation internationally that got this done. Secondly, Dakota touched briefly on it. Desert Storm was a significant and important turning point in our country's history. And our collective conscience of our citizens finally realized what a tragic mistake it was to have treated our Vietnam folks the way that they were treated. That could never, ever happen again. And I'm happy to say that legacy continues to live on to this day. And it's not even just for those who are in uniform, it's for those that served. And my wife does it all the time. She drives me crazy. Every time she sees some guy with a hat or some lady, thank you for your service. That is a result of Operation Desert Storm. Okay, the word "thank you for your service," that phrase did not exist in the American lexicon prior to that. So this lasting legacy continues on, and rightfully so. And I always like to tell people, you didn't have people buying you a beer in the airport in the 80s or even in 1990, okay? It fundamentally changed and reestablished the relationship between the American public and the military and those who have served. And that is a wonderful thing, and I'm so glad to see that it continues. People may not agree with what's going on politically, but they don't hold it against the folks that are actually called into duty and are placed in harm's way. And last but not least, we cannot forget that there are 383 Americans who made the ultimate sacrifice. That sacrifice is the same that's ever, since the beginning of our country's founding. It's no less important than any other time. I've got a cousin whose name is on the Vietnam Wall over here on the mall. I've got another second cousin who is buried at the Brittany Cemetery in France. My relatives are no more important than these 383, and we have to remember that service and that contribution to our country. It's very important. We also can't forget that there are 700,000 Americans who answered the call. And as we saw in the very first slide, the predictions were dire. Okay, this wasn't, hey, you're going to go over, you're going to be back home real quick. Okay, I remember I got the call, they said, have your stuff packed, have enough stuff packed for a year. You're not going to be home any sooner than a year, probably 18 months. Okay, that's what people were prepared to do. So these 700,000 were prepared to make that ultimate sacrifice. Not as many as in the past or other things, other situations, not as many were required to do that, but this willingness to serve is no less importance. I remember myself before deploying, sitting down, and they had a little will in front of me. I don't know why, I didn't have anything anyhow, 20-year-old guy, but it was a little sheet that said that if I died, my family would get $50,000, my parents. And I'm thinking, boy, they're lucky. I'm not so lucky. But as I'm signing that, I thought to myself, there's probably a good chance, based on what they're saying, I'm probably not going to come back. Probably a good chance. And I was okay with that, and everybody was, because that's what we signed up for, to protect this country and to make those sacrifices. And I'm so glad to see that service is still alive at this day, at this time. And although remembering the fallen is of utmost importance with this memorial, it is not going to be a place of mourning. That's what's different about it. Because of these good aspects and the lasting legacy, that story is going to be told for future generations. And again, we hope that, the whole collaboration, the whole working together is going to be told through here. We hope that we can tell the story of this evolution or this turning point with the military and the public. There are some good things to talk about at this memorial too, which is a little bit different than some. Now the location, we got our legislative authorization back in 2014. In 2017, spring of 2017, we got Area 1 approval, which means it can be located, I won't get into all of the mechanics, but close to the other important memorials or significant events in history. And then back on June 21st, we had a very, very big day where we finally were approved a location or a site for this. And the site is actually right across from the Institute of Peace at 23rd and Constitution. The Lincoln Memorial is kind of in the backdrop and over to the side a little bit. And then you also have the Vietnam Memorial that is just 2 notches over. And we had a number of Vietnam veterans come and testify as to the importance of locating it close to their memorial. And I think it is very fitting. And the last thing I'll say about the Vietnam connection is I've always felt it from the very beginning, that the reason why this was such a rapid and resounding success is because all of our leaders were Vietnam veterans. And they weren't going to let what happened the first time around happen to us. I really do. I give them all the credit, along with the folks here in Washington doing the right thing. But there is a tremendous connection with Vietnam. We even, believe it or not, had a good number of Vietnam veterans that had served in Operation Desert Storm too. Those were our old guys. They were like in their 30s at that point. We're thinking, oh my gosh, that's really, really old. But it really wasn't. So, again, this memorial, we want to tell the story to future generations. It isn't just for today. And I hope that this talk has maybe made you think a little bit differently about something that sometimes is discounted due to the duration. And again, never underestimate the impact of something based upon durations. And certainly, I've even heard some people make some comments too about, well, hardly anybody died. Boy, if it's one American, it's one too many as far as I'm concerned. So, we're very, very happy to know that this story will be forever told in a prominent place here in our nation's capital. And I really appreciate your interest and your attention, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions or comments at this point, if there are any. Would love to, and thank you. It's been a real honor to be here. Thank you.
I just want to amplify some of the comments that Scott made. 4.5 years, right, as a Marine infantryman, so yes. Right there on the front lines. This was I guess sometimes it was called the CNN war. It's where 24/7 cable news coverage was right there bringing a war home to America's televisions on that constant reporting. We all watched it if you were back here in the U.S. in our living rooms eating dinner because the time difference was such that those things were going on. Lee Greenwood's song, Proud to be an American, came out at that time as well. So it was an amazing point in history. And I love the comment about duration not really being a metric by which we should judge these sorts of things. Under, I think it was Lieutenant General Gus Pagonis that led the logistical effort to get men and materiel over there in such a short period of time, and then certainly under the leadership of Norman Schwarzkopf. So extraordinary thing. But if I could have you describe a little bit more about kind of the ground-up nature of this thing. It was you and a couple of colleagues, I believe, put the thing together, and without a lot of heavyweights out of Hollywood or Congress, a little bit of how this came to be at the memorial, sure, and then we can turn it over for some questions from
sure.
the audience.
Well, again, as I mentioned, this started, and I don't want to sound like Steve Jobs here, but I mean, it's true. I was sitting in my basement on the eve of the 20th anniversary when this hit me, and I said, I don't know. I've never done this. I've been to Washington, D.C., maybe once in my life, in 8th grade or something. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I just knew that I had to do something. So the first thing that I did is I reached out to two of the jokers that I served with and said, hey, I'm looking to do this memorial. What do you think? Yeah, okay. Well, I need to talk to you two because I need to have a secretary and a treasurer to open up the 501c3. So, to this day, that's why we're domiciled as a 501c3 in the state of Arkansas, is because the guy who volunteered to be the treasurer lives there. But, Dakota, you're absolutely right. I've got to brag on the people that have been involved in this. We don't have, a lot of heavyweight people on the board. I had a lot of learning. I had my former General Boomer, tell me, we were sitting down to lunch early in this, and he said, Scott, you got to get people in there that have really deep pockets, that can donate themselves, and can be on your board, and you have all these connections. And it just, for whatever reason, didn't happen. One other thing is, in fairness, all of our generals, they're typically, if they're not 80, they're right there, and some of them are beyond that. And you can't expect them to have the energy levels or the wherewithal to jump in with both feet with something, like this. And I told, General Boomer, I said, hey, I understand, it's our turn. We'll carry the water. But this is really a grassroots effort. We don't have any brand names. And I think it just goes to show you, and maybe some of you younger folks, you're just a couple of years younger than me, maybe it will show you that you can do things in a different way. You can do it unconventionally. You don't have to do it the way it's always been done. One of the other things that we did, we're all volunteers, okay? I get a modest stipend to kind of offset some of my cost. Ask my wife, it's very modest. But this is truly, coming from the heart. There is no ulterior motive. And I keep having people ask me, well, what's in it for you, Scott? The only thing that's in it for me is knowing that the people and this story is not going to be forgotten for future generations. That's what, it excites me knowing that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, that memorial is going to be there to tell an important story that fits in chronologically with the rest of the important and significant things in our country's history. So it really is kind of a remarkable story that, we don't have the Hollywood, spokesman and all of this stuff. It's just been really a grassroots effort. And, the people, we've got a wonderful lady who does the social media for us. I've learned that I'm not even on Facebook myself, and I just heard it earlier. They said, well, Facebook is for old people. I said, well, no wonder why I'm not on. I'm not old. But we have not. That has just grown organically with this. We know that at a certain point it's going to have to step up in terms of a donor scenario. But the other thing I didn't tell you is that this is not a long-term project at this point. Well, it is to me. 8 years has been an eternity to me. But we are going to be done with this in 2021. Does anybody know what's significant about 2021? I don't even like admitting this, but it's the 30th anniversary, and I'm only 32, so how could that, the math is not working here. But it's going to be the 30th anniversary, so Veterans Day of 2021 is when we want to have this complete. So, we're not, and people are always, in Washington particularly, say, well, where's your office? Well, we don't have one. Where's your office going to be once it's built? we don't need one. I mean, it's just, it's a different mindset. We're so singularly focused, and I hate to be cliche here, and it may sound cutesy, but I live this. I tell people we want to be the Desert Storm of memorials. We want to get in, we want to get it done, and we want to get out. And I don't care if they call this a 100-hour memorial. I don't care. We'll know better. So, but open it up. Any questions, comments? If anybody has anything, I'd be happy to answer.
Hi, I'm James. Can you hear me? I'm James Martin, News Arabia. But so thank you very much for this. I was a young reporter for CNN during when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and so I remember that very well. And so what is the cost are you looking at in terms of this memorial? I mean, how much is it going to cost? And has Kuwait been approached in terms of donating? Would that even be legal? I'm not sure, but I mean, seeing as we liberated them, have they been approached in terms of financing in some way the cost of this memorial?
Those are great questions. And the problem is I've been asked for the last 8 years 2 consistent questions. Gosh, Scott, what's it going to look like? Where's it going to be? And I haven't really been able to answer that question, at least where it's going to be, until just back here in June. We actually, until you have a site, it's very hard to determine the costs, okay? So here recently, what we did is that we hired a professional cost estimator. They have people out there that can do this, all of the hard and the soft costs. We were hypothetically kind of guesstimating, I guess, $25 million is what our original number was. The thing I didn't take into consideration with that number is you have to have 110% of the budget in the bank before you can break ground. The 10% is for any overages or all of that type of stuff. I've heard that some constructions, projects, that does happen every once in a while, like most of them. But when we had the estimator, we were pleasantly surprised that with all hard and soft cost materials and everything, it came up with it was just shy of 34 million is what it was. And I know it sounds like a lot, but you would be surprised. I mean, all of the things, and again, I think, Dakota, you'd mentioned the grassroots nature of this. It's even more remarkable if I could show you some invoices that we've had to pay just to get where we are up to now. And I'm the guy that's waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning wondering, are we going is that fish fry going to give us enough money to pay the architect? But, it really, it's really, phenomenal. So we're really happy with that number. It's very modest. It's very reasonable. If you take a look at some of the more recent memorials, I think the Disabled Veterans for Life was somewhere like $86 million. I mean, so we're proposing something that is our mantra has kind of been profound simplicity. We're delivering a profound message. We're going to do it in a simplistic way. It's not going to be over the top. It's not World War II. We know that. We realize that, and we're not trying to be. So we're being very diligent. The other advantage to a grassroots organization, as you probably can appreciate, is that we're pretty doggone tight with what we spend. We look at every item, and we respect, if somebody donates $10, we treat it with the same respect as if somebody does $10 million. And in regards, sir, to your question about Kuwait, I have nothing but the of utmost respect for Kuwait, for Ambassador Al-Sabah. They're wonderful people at the embassy. We have discussed this. Obviously, this is about the liberation of their country. They're very interested in it, and we have discussed that. And I think you can probably appreciate that when you're dealing with governments, we don't hold the monopoly on bureaucracy. But they have been a tremendous help even thus far. I mean, even just from a non-financial, just being able to work with them and to be able to get their input too, to a certain point. We like to have some of their input, especially when we talk about some of the aspects of the liberation in the memorial. So. I hope that answers your question sufficiently.
It does, but have you asked for some sort of monetary?
We have, yes, sir, we have. We approach them, and yes, sir, that's in process. And again, I don't want to speak on behalf of any other country or my own, even for that matter. I'm not qualified to do that. But yes, we have approached them and have discussed that. Yes, sir. I also would mention, in keeping with that question, I do have to recognize that before I got here this morning, I was actually at the Embassy of Hungary, and they, of course, were one of our coalition partners. They are the first coalition donor. So again, I'm just very, very honored to be working with them. It's a wonderful, symbolic, overture. They're the first one. Somebody's got to be the first one in the water, and it was the government of Hungary and all their people at the embassy here. Wonderful folks to work with. So, thank you.
Thank you. Jim Phillips here at Heritage. And I remember during the controversy over the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, there was a lot of back and forth in Congress. And unfortunately, very little bipartisanship back then. And how have you managed to avoid that? And do you have a design in mind for this? And will it also recognize the Allied sacrifices?
Great questions. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. You're looking at the legislative guy, and I'm just saying that just because it's a grassroots. I worked tirelessly walking those halls. They're marble floors, and by the way, when you're doing that 8 hours a day, it does bother your back and your hips and everything else. So we basically address this obviously from a grassroots standpoint. We didn't have a media blitz through social media. This was face to face. Congressman so-and-so, would you be willing to, co-sponsor this? I got very fortunate early on in that I was introduced to a congressman who now finds himself in a pretty powerful position here in D.C., the VA committee, Congressman Phil Rowe from Tennessee's 1st District. The friend of mine who introduced him, ironically, is a good friend of mine, Jeff Miller from Hendersonville, North Carolina, who is one of the founders of Honor Flight, where they fly the WW2 in Korea. So Jeff, I had a congressman in my district at the time I really didn't want to deal with, and I said, who can I deal? And he said, you got to meet Phil Rose. So Phil, I really give him the credit for really kind of greasing the skids behind the scenes, but it took a lot of just shoe leather going into the offices. Here's what we're doing. Would you be willing to co-sponsor it? And yeah, there really wasn't any controversy. On May 28th of 2014, I'll never forget it. We went into the House of Representatives, and we, it was up for a vote. And of course, you're kind of nervous, and they have this big scoreboard up there. And the moment that I knew that we probably were in good shape is when I saw with my very own eyes. I was watching Nancy Pelosi. And I looked at her, and I saw her take her finger, and she pushed the green button. I said, I think we got this. So that was kind of the turning point. But yes, sir, I mean, we have somehow, it hasn't been controversial. I think people, realize that there really isn't a whole lot, to stir up, from a controversial nature. I mean, if assembling a coalition of countries and going and liberating, I mean, I can't see where. But again, I mean, I'm not a politician. I'm sure there is some way that somebody could have done that, but we didn't, didn't experience that. I'd also like to point out the fact that on the Senate side, we had a bipartisan effort. Senator John Bozeman from Arkansas was the original sponsor, and Joe Donnelly from Indiana, one Democrat, one Republican, were on that, and they drove that through. And both of those guys have been phenomenal, been very helpful navigating that. As to the design, we are actually in the design approval phase at this point, and we are looking to get back in front of the Commission of Fine Arts on November 15th, for a hearing and see kind of where we are with the preliminary design approval. I will say that the original design that we hope to keep at least some iteration of does resemble the left hook. Everybody can see that. So we're really hoping that was really something that came back, from the veterans. And we kind of did this a little different. Again, I didn't know what I was doing. And we came into this and had an architecture firm that was referred to me from AIA here in Washington. And I call up, I said, look, I'm wanting to build a memorial in Washington. And they didn't hang up on me. So I think, okay, I'm in pretty good shape here. And they referred me to an architecture firm by the name of CSO Architects in Indianapolis, Indiana. Didn't know him from Adam, called him up, said what I was going to do. And he said, well, we'll talk to the partners. We'll get back to you. I'm like, no, you won't. You're not going to call me. And about a week later, they said, we talked about it. We believe in it. This is important. And by the way, we're going to do a pro bono. And so 4.5 years, these folks did a pro bono. So, you know, and what they did is to get to the point of what we wanted to tell the story of, they basically approached veterans and family members and the public at large to get some feedback. What are like the 5 top things that should be commemorated and what stories should be told through the memorial? So we feel that that's better than any design competition. You have somebody that has no vested interest. There's really no passion. It's just more of a clinical and sterile type of a situation. Here you get the feelings of people that really experience this, and then you kind of boil it down to those top 4 or 5 aspects. And final, the conclusion of what this design process, we're hoping that sometime within the year, we'll be done with that, and then you can move on to the actual groundbreaking and so forth. So it's a little bit of a protracted process, as is much in this town, I've learned. Yes, sir.
Hello, Will Thatcher. I'm an intern at the Heritage Foundation. Could you tell us a little bit about any fundraising events you might be having in the future and about how ordinary people might be able to contribute to this project?
Wow, this is great. Is he a plant? Did somebody from our... No, that's a great question. Thank you. You know, we have a multitude of events going on at any given time. A lot of them, some are grassroots. You know, VFW Post. You know, VFW is a tremendous supporter. They donated $500,000. You know, it's been 4 years ago. You know, so they were very early in supporting this. So we have a lot of people that are doing, we even have people that are doing Facebook fundraisers, believe it or not. So, I mean, you know, really the sky is a limit on the grassroots level. Now, we also recognize that there's only so many fish you can fry and cookies you can sell, and that's probably not going to build a memorial. We recognize that. So we do have a series of bigger events. One that we have coming up on October 30th that we're pretty excited about is that a couple of our guys, the architect from Indianapolis, they're in the airport here, Reagan Airport. They run into the governor of Indiana. Hey, here's what we're doing. And he says, oh, well, you need to have a fundraiser at my mansion or my residence. So we're actually going to have a fundraiser at the Indiana governor's mansion on October 30th, and we're hoping that that'll be kind of the kickoff of this next leg, kind of taking it up a notch or two so that we can really raise those substantial funds, the hundreds of thousands and the millions that we need, because we recognize that, you know, tens of thousands are only going to get you so far. We've got to get over the hump. And again, going back to our timeline, we've got a pretty aggressive timeline, so we've got to really make it happen so that we can actually break ground in a timely manner to keep us on track for that 30th anniversary. But and again, in answer to your question, I mean, really, the sky is the limit. We have a very active Facebook page. People can donate right on the website. It's just real simple. You can Google it, National Desert Storm Memorial, or you can do NDSWM is the acronym. And again, we have a fabulous Facebook page. It's dynamic. There's stuff on there every day and updating and so forth. So we would love for you to, if you'd be inclined to help spread the word so we can get this done. Thank you. That's a great question.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gonzalez. I'm from Venice, Florida. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. And I was there with you guys. You guys finished so fast that I got there a little late. I remember being at Portsmouth Naval Hospital while we were training, and we evacuated all our staff. We pretty much shut down the hospital. And a few months later, I was rolling around on an aircraft carrier supporting our guys as they led the air missions then into Yugoslavia and later on in Somalia. But listen, you said a very important, and thank you for your service, number one, and number two, congratulations on this just sheer will project that you have undertaken. You said something that is unrelated, kind of, to the topic at hand of your memorial, but it's also integral, and that is that feeling that you had when you signed the will, when you were signing that will and you felt that it was okay. And I wonder if you could expand a little bit on that feeling, that acceptance of the possibility that you weren't going to come home, and whether that linked you in any way to the guys in Normandy or Iwo Jima or anywhere else where Americans engaged in battle knowing that they were probably not going to come back home.
Thank you for your service, Doctor, and for what you did. And no offense, but I'm glad that you got there too late. That's a good thing because that means that your services weren't required at the level that you anticipated. But yeah, thanks for that question. And again, it's the mindset, and I think it really is. It's the same feeling that those guys had on those Higgins boats as the flap dropped, on D-Day. It's just that quiet assurance and that acceptance that, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. However, we do have a lot of control in terms of what happens. We felt very trained. We basically went to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina in December, and we conducted desert training. You have to have a little bit of an imagination to do desert training in Camp Lejeune in December. But I think a lot of it is it's that same mindset. This is what I signed up for. I knew that it would happen. I knew that, we drew inspiration from those that went before us. We really did, and we knew that, we felt the same emotions that they did, and they were willing to answer that call. Some people have said, I've heard it, make some comment. Well, it was all about oil. Well, really, I never saw my oil prices go down. I don't know about anybody else. It wasn't about oil, and it was even one of the privates, PFCs. He was quoted in a local paper upon deploying. They had this little dog and pony show and a little send-off and a little pizza party and this parade in a park or whatever, pass and review. And they interviewed this private. Okay, this guy is just some backwoods guy, not the smartest in the world, but he said something really profound. They said, well, do you think this is about oil? He said, well, no, I think it's about helping some people in Kuwait. That guy got it, uneducated. And I think when you know what your job is and you know that you're doing something that really is, right, and I think it's virtuous, you're just helping out your fellow man. I think you draw some inspiration, even though you might not identify that in your thought patterns as a 20-some-year-old. That's driving a lot of that. It's that purpose that's higher than yourself. And again, it's what you signed up for. It's what you trained for. And we weren't warmongers. I mean, you get a few of these John Wayne types. I've seen a few of those that they're talking about how tough they are, and then there's a Scud missile coming in, and I won't even go into details, but yeah, the ones that talk are usually ones that don't pack the gear, as we said in the Marine Corps. But I really think that goes into the whole thought pattern. We felt like this was an important thing. The mission was right. We were helping out our fellow man, and I think when you have that coupled with your commitment of why you're there to begin with. And I'll tell you, Doctor, I mean, I knew some people, this was after the fact, that basically staged some accidents prior to deployment to get out of it. I mean, they were scared out of their wits, and you came back, and it was so-and-so. They were faking. They staged this accident. They fell off of a second-story thing. I wouldn't want to be that guy, because how can I let my guys go, and I'm back here safe, and they're in harm's way? I think a lot of that, I think you draw a lot of strength, too, from the people that you're around. And courage, let's face it. I mean, you're looking to your right, you're looking to your left, and you're a family at that point. And that's something that I think that if you've never served in the military, it's hard to grasp, is that relationship that we have with those people. Because not only are you buddies and pals, but you've got to rely on them. You have to know that they're looking out for you as much as they're looking out for themselves. And you just don't see that very often. But yes, that was absolutely a play. And again, Doctor, I think this whole thing, what has even motivated me, a source of motivation, is the fact why I'm doing this, and every day of my life truly has changed. I know it sounds cliche or kind of corny, but every day of my life I do feel like it's a gift, because I felt like I could have been one of those 383. And for some reason I wasn't. And for some reason it wasn't tens of thousands. We put it together, it was executed so well, but at the end of the day, I feel very fortunate to have had 27 extra years of life that a good number of people never had. And I don't think you can go through that, even something as brief as it was, and not have it fundamentally change you. It's the intensity of the experience, not necessarily the duration. So I hope that that answers your question. And again, thank you for your willingness to serve there because it was a great scene. I saw a few of these little hospital tents, and they didn't have anything to do at the end, like in Bahrain, and it was great to know that that they were there. And I wanted to just say too, I hope that you weren't on the Tripoli. Because that was one that hit the mine and was in dry dock, and it had a hole that you could drive like 10 semis through. I mean, huge, but okay. Well, thank you for your service and for pointing out that psychological aspect, because it really does drive everything. And I'll close by saying that I've talked with thousands of fellow veterans, over the last 8 years. And, most of them, it's the same common theme. They'll say, I'm nothing special. I'm just trying to feed my family. I'm trying to work. I'm trying to, to do this and that. I'm just your average Joe. But that was a one time in my life where I really felt like I was a part of something that was bigger than me, that I was important because I was a part of this team. And that's something that, we can never forget. You can't ever underestimate the power when you have that collective group of people that are on the same page, headed in the right direction with that mission. And Dakota, again, I think that's been the reason for our success, is because we are all on the same page going to the same target. Thank you.
Thank you so much.